All right, welcome back, folks. In this video, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the difference between hand tools and power tools, and I also want to talk to you about hand tool safety. So before we begin, we should ask the simple question: what's the difference between a hand tool and a power tool? My students often say, a hand tool is a tool that you hold in your hands, and a power tool is a tool, like the tool back here, that you turn on. Well, this isn't always the case. There are power tools we hold in our hands too. If we take, for instance, the hand saw. This hand saw is a hand tool. I hold it in my hands, and I'm actually going to use the power of my body to power the saw. So I cut the piece of wood with this saw in my body. I can use the circular saw, which does the same thing. I'm holding this saw in my hands and it'll do the exact same thing. The difference is this tool was powered by a motor and electricity. So power tools are tools that are powered by something other than our bodies, whether it be electricity or gas or air, the list goes on. But right now I want to focus on hand tools. Sometimes I ask my students, what do you think is more dangerous, a hand tool or a power tool? And students will often say power tools. Well, the truth is, any tool that you don't know how to use safely is dangerous. And in fact, I think more people hurt themselves with hand tools than they do power tools. And part of it's psychological. That is, if you see that circular saw spinning and you hear it moving, it seems dangerous to you. If you take this hand saw, which, they're fairly ubiquitous, we see these around quite a bit, it doesn't seem as dangerous, but you can still hurt yourself with a hand tool. Hand tools deserve just as much respect as power tools. So you can see here on the table we have the hand tools that we commonly use in our wood shop. A screwdriver, which I'm sure you've all seen, a hammer, a chisel, a rasp, a hand plane, and a hand saw. And of course there are many others too, but these are the ones we most commonly use. What I want to do right now is talk a little bit about safety when you're using these tools. So first, the most important thing we need to remember is that you always need to wear what? Safety glasses. And you know what? I forgot to put these on when I cut with that circular saw. I don't know if you noticed that. But first, you always want to make sure you're wearing safety glasses, even when you're working with hand tools. It's very important you keep them on. So number one, always wear safety glasses. Okay, the next thing I want to talk to you about is about how to cut safely. And to do this, I want to tell you a quick story. So when I first started teaching woodshop, I had a student, and this particular student was working on a cutting board. They had just finished the cutting board, or finished gluing together wood for the cutting board, and it looked something like this. Let me grab it. I don't know if you guys can see here, but here's a piece of wood. 3 pieces have been glued together, and there's some glue that's squeezed out onto the cutting board. Well, the student brought the cutting board to me and asked me what the next step was. And I told the student, I want you to take the cutting board, I want you to clamp it down to the bench, and I want you to get a paint scraper and scrape all the extra glue off. Something like this. Does that make sense? Well, this is what the student did. They took their cutting board, they set it down on the bench. And instead of grabbing a paint scraper, they grabbed a chisel. Now the reason they grabbed the chisel is because they weren't paying attention to the names of the hand tools we use in the shop, and they actually thought that this was a paint scraper. But this is not a paint scraper. It's a hardened piece of steel with a razor sharp edge on it. They took the chisel and they used the chisel to scrape the glue off the piece of wood. Now let's look at what happened here. When they brought the chisel over to the piece of wood, they started scraping the glue. Now the wood moved. What did the student forget to do? The student forgot to clamp the piece of wood down to the table. If they had just taken the clamp and clamped it down to the table, right? They then could have used the chisel to carefully scrape the glue off the piece of wood. Now, this is not the ideal tool to use to scrape glue, but it'll work, right? they could have done this and they could have kept 2 hands on the chisel. Instead, they did this. The wood started moving, so what did they do? They became das Humanklump, right? You see where this is going now, right? So now they have chisel, sharp objects in one place, and they have their body in a position where a tool can cut it, and they're cutting towards themselves. So you've got this scenario. And sure enough, they scraped a little bit, and they found a big chunk of glue. So they leaned all the way back, they put their weight into it, and they forced the chisel through the piece of glue into their hand. Not good. So we never ever force a tool or overload a tool. Because when you do this, you have all your weight and momentum behind the tool, and you can cut yourself. The same would be true on a power tool. If you're pushing a piece of wood really hard into a power tool, and you have all your weight behind it, your hand could then go into the power tool. So, quick review here. Number 1, if the student had clamped the piece of wood like I asked, they then could have kept 2 hands on the tool. If the student were using the right tool for the job, the paint scraper instead of the chisel, they would have been much safer. If the student had not put their body in a position where a tool can cut it and cut towards themselves, they would not have cut their hand. And if the student had not forced it, there's still a chance they could not have cut their hand. So all those rules are really, really important when we're working with all tools, but especially hand tools. Here's something else I see occasionally in the shop, which makes me very scared. People working towards their leg or their body, right? This can be very dangerous. I see it a lot with screwdrivers, setting screws in a piece of wood, okay? If you have your hand behind a screwdriver while you're setting a screw into a piece of wood, you can stab yourself with a screwdriver. That's very dangerous as well. So you need to keep all these things in mind. Always consider where your body is in relation to the tool that you're using. The next thing I want to talk about is the hammer. We occasionally drive nails in our wood shop with a hammer. We sometimes use the nail gun as well. But let's talk really quickly about hammer safety. Number 1, when you're nailing 2 pieces of wood together, you always hold the nail in the hand you are not hammering with. You're going to push the nail into the piece of wood, and you're going to gently pound the nail in. As soon as the nail is set, you're going to remove your other hand from the nail. Because if you are pounding and you miss and hit your finger, it is really going to hurt. That's a nice way of saying it, okay? So when we pound the nail in, you always keep your eye on the nail. Just like you're hitting a ball, you always keep your eye on the ball, you always keep your eye on the nail, and you hit it straight in. The claw of the hammer is only used for pulling nails out of a piece of wood. We never use the claw for separating pieces of wood or for doing other things like that. Okay, it's just used for removing the nails from the wood. So, quick review. Remember, always wear safety glasses. Make sure you never have sharp points or sharp things pointed at your hand and you position yourself in a tool where a tool can cut you. That's always very dangerous. Always use the right tool for the job. Make sure you are clamping the piece of wood you're working on, whether it's with a bar clamp or a bench vise. Make sure you always clamp the piece of wood that you're working on. And when you're using a hammer, watch out for your fingers. Okay, I look forward to working with you guys soon in the shop. I hope you learned a little bit from this video. See you soon.